Hey guys, welcome back to another Vanguard video. Today we're talking about Youthberk Fantome, and we have his tragic backstory in the flavor text here, alone in the wilderness, searching for the dragon who killed his father. So pretty much he's just running around in Dragon Empire, killing dragons because his father was killed by one, and he basically has nowhere to go, and this is pretty much his tragic Fantome backstory. Anyways, he's got the usual auto when wrote upon if you want second to draw a card. Next up, we have Will of the Destruction Dragon Youth. So auto when plays by writing from Desolation of Loneliness Youth. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, you choose up to one of either a card with Youthberk in its card name or a Crimson Moon card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. So to recap what the Crimson Moons do, they're basically your cost for binding for the Fantome skills. They can also basically send themselves from damage to drop to ping yourself 1, in case just you can get them out of there. It can also superior call from the top 5 or add another Crimson Moon card, because a lot of the Fantome skills bind 1 to 2 Crimson Moons. Alright, next up we have the grade 2 Radline, which is Crimson Wrath Dragslayer Youth. So auto when wrote upon by grade 3 with the Draggrass ability, this is the new Revolt Dress, but in the Dragon Empire Fantome version, you cost Energy Blast 3, choose a grade 2 or greater card from your drop, and put it into your hand. So very different actually from the Keter one, because you can only grab unit cards. This one can grab anything, so you could potentially, grab back an order from drop, but again, the Crimson Moon order is grade 1 or less, but technically you could grab like a grade 3 Regulus piece, for example. Alright, now we have Youthberk Draegforce Arms Fantome, and there is a lot to talk about here. Not too much that we didn't already know from the anime, but pretty much a full review here of the text. So we have Draggrass, so auto Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attack, you choose up to one card with the drag form in its card name from your hand. You write it as stand and it gets drive -2 until end of turn. The new drag form that we have for Dynast basically gives drive +1, so you're doing 3 drives in a turn. If you wrote a card at the end of turn, you choose a Youthberk Draegforce Arms Fantome from your soul and write it as rest. So just like I thought from what we saw from the anime, there's no revolt dressing from drop. You basically have to do it from hand, so you're very, very reliant on finding it. But you do have an act very similar to the original Youth to find it off the top 3, as well as it also being able to basically be found the new Dynast form off the Crimson Moon as well. So we have act on Vanguard Circle once per turn. You cost discard a card from hand. You look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You choose up to one card with drag form in its card name, or up to one grade 2 or less from among them. Reveal it. Put into your hand if it is a card with drag form in its card name, and there's pretty much only one drag form right now, which is Dynast, or you can call it to Vanguard Circle if it's not a drag form. You may discard all of the remaining cards. If you did not discard them, you put them on the bottom deck in any order. So just like the original Youth, you can only grab drag forms. You can't grab any Dragforce. You cannot grab Persona Ride. So pretty much you're grabbing Dynast or superior calling something from the top 3. And because you can mill cards from drop, you can build up your drop faster for the last skill. So auto Vanguard Circle at the beginning of your main phase, you get when your Vanguard attacks, this unit gets power +1k until end of battle for each card in your drop with Dragon in its race until end of turn. And we saw that this works for Dino Dragon and other things. That basically confirms it now. It's kind of like how Dragon Iron has that text where it just has Dragon in its race. Kind of similar to a reference to Buddy Fight, because, we also have Dragon Iron in Vanguard as well. But yeah, +1k power is pretty nice, especially because you're going to build drop very, very easily throughout the game. Pretty much everything in your deck will be Dragon except for the Youths pretty much, and, the orders pretty much. Everything else is a Dragon, and so you're going to be scaling pretty well into the late game. But this is a 4-tack deck compared to Exist, so I think if I'm just comparing the two decks, looking at just the rad line and the fact that you basically have to CB1 for Dynast in order to have that higher ceiling for the deck, I think Exist still just has it up there, and also Exist just has, Nebula Knight Order and very good grade 2s, and of course Sirgon as well. Submarine doesn't work the greatest in this deck, and Dinofest is really good, and I'll talk about it as well once we get to the list, but I think the list for the self-contained cards in this list for the Fantome cards are already very, very tight. So I think a lot of people will definitely cook a lot of different versions for this deck, and the generics are very, very strong for Dragon Empire. Don't get me wrong, but I think for the most part, you will be playing basically the self-contained cards that you already see revealed here, which is nice because it means less generics unless you have to buy Habitable Zone, which will be a pain. And of course, Crimson Moon is still very, very expensive unless we get another printing of that in the next DZ-BT14 Fantome set. But yeah, but just from first impressions, I think it's a very strong Vanguard regardless, just like the original Youth. I think having that red text here Vanguard is really cool because, again, this will carry over for Dynast or whatever drag form you go into for the second Vanguard swing. And in the late game, this will scale very, very well, especially if you keep living. So just a very nice effect. For the Draggrass, I wasn't really expecting it to revolve just from drop, so you do have to do it from hand. So you aren't exactly going plus as much as you would with Tempest. For example, Tempest, you lose a card from hand because you're revolve dressing. But then, CB1, you got removal, you get 2 cards, and you also get that single drive from Sequana as well. Whereas in this case, you kind of are losing a lot of hand very fast. You have to rely on generics and other effects to do that. But we do have a discard effect that does kind of bring at least one rear back, so you're not completely, minusing 1 to, use the act every time. But for for the most part, I would say the deck is pretty self-contained, but again, the Dragon Empire generics are very strong, and of course, I'll have slides and a deck list for that at the very end to kind of discuss everything. All right, next up, we have Youthberk Draegforce Dynast, and this card is really strong, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily as strong as Exist, but of course, it's also got the Phantom skill as well. So, interestingly enough, the Phantom skill is actually on the basically Revolve form instead of the base form for Youth. Anyways, continuous in deck if you have a Vanguard with Youth in its card name while this card is revealed by Crimson Moon card's ability, so basically the second ability of Crimson Moon, so you can actually add it up the top 5 from Crimson Moon. Then next up, auto, when placed on Vanguard Circle by the Draggrass ability, you perform all the following. So all your front row rear guards get plus 5k until end of turn. Your opponent's Vanguard's grade through greater get another plus 5, so scaling over defensive, plus 10k. The next skill is Counterblast Lock, so if you don't have the CB for this, you're not really getting that extra drive or crit, which I think is quite unfortunate. But cost Counterblast 1, this unit gets drive plus 1 until end of turn. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade through greater, then it also gets crit plus 1 until end of turn. And this is very relevant because if you do flip Drag Vita on that one single drive, it's absolute robbery because yes, you will be single drive, but you'll still have that crit plus 1 100 mil swinging. So yeah, Drag Vita is obviously going to be the play in this deck. I think it's still going to be kind of awkward. Like, you could just do twin into twin and then go into Draegform Dynast, assuming you flipped it on the first 2 drop checks, obviously. But yeah, if you're not playing Drag Vita, there's still a lot of really good OTs you could be playing anyways. You're still a 3-drive deck, so it's fine. I just want to point out that that was end of turn because unlike Alphard, that was until end of battle for the Phantom skill specifically. This whole skill is lasting until end of turn pretty much. And then last but not least, we have the Phantom skill for removal. Auto Vanguard Circle once per turn. When it attacks, you bind a total of 1 to 2 Crimson Moon cards from hand, soul, or drop. You choose the same number of your opponent's rear guards as the number of cards bound for this cost, so basically 1 or 2. Retire them. All your front row units get plus 5k power until end of turn, so even more scaling. And then if your bind zone has 3 or more Crimson Moon cards, they get another plus 5k power. So pretty much you want to bind 1 and then 2, or then 2 and then 1 and then 1 to basically prolong the Phantom skill, while also wiping your opponent's front row and getting some very, very easy power scaling. So we saw that the numbers are very similar to Exist going first, but I think Exist at least still has that, not really tied to any CB. You just need energy, really, and your opponent just eats absolute crap, going first or second. They just get rushed down completely. And I think the scaling here is a little bit better, and obviously having Retire is really strong because you are pretty much, you don't really have any intercept seal like Varga. I'm surprised they didn't throw that in here either. But again, having that Retire every turn for your opponent's attackers or boosters is really annoying, and you are scaling very well. And of course, crit pressure and drive check pressure is very strong. You're basically 3 drive checks. Maybe one day we'll get like a Sequana for Youthberk Dynast as well, for, the Youthberk Phantom. But for now, it is basically 3 drives for attack deck. Kind of very similar to the original Youthberk Encounter, I guess, as a reference to that. But I do think being a 4 attack deck kind of holds you back a little bit. But again, your scaling is going to be really good from the red text that you gain from Youthberk Phantom just to, get +1 for every dragon and drop. Because again, pretty much everything in your deck besides the orders and the humans, which are Youthberk, are being pretty much dragons, which will help you scale very, very well throughout the game. So yeah, a lot of really easy power, a lot of really easy pressure, and Phantom skill to wipe 2 on board is pretty good. So now for the really good cards that we saw in the anime. The first one is Obliterate Dragon. This has the act and drop. If you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Youthberk in its card name, you cost Soul Blast 2 cards with Youth in their card names. You call this card to Rearguard Circle and it gets plus 5k power until end of turn. So even more scaling going first or second, and it is a maple effect. But because you have to Soul Blast 2 cards with Youth, you pretty much have to Revolve from every turn, but this is going to be easy because you're basically going to be hitting that 2 soul, and of course you also have your ride line as well. So really, really nice that this doesn't really use any energy. You really have a lot of soul to work with unless you use multiple Habitable Zone in the early game. And again, that plus 5k power isn't tied to grade, very nice. Then you have the auto when placed on Rearguard Circle, so it will activate when it calls itself out from drop. You cost Counterblast 1, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card with Youthberk in its card name from among them, reveal it, cleanse your hand, shuffle the deck. If you didn't reveal, countercharge 1, so you kind of have to play this. It's like the Schneisel, basically, that's calling itself back from drop. But you do pretty much have to, find your use in order to play the game because you can't revolve just from drop. You don't have that flexibility like we have for Rebuild and Exist. So while I do think this deck is a lot more linear and will definitely be hard carried by Dragon Empire generics, this card is still pretty good. At least it does something for when you whiff, and just having a reoccurring attacker very similar to Beslutin in Keter Sanctuary Rebuild is just very nice. Next card to talk about is Forlorn Hope Dragon, and I was surprised we didn't see this in the anime, but I guess they wanted to show off Brachioforce. So auto Rearguard Circle, when you grade through a greater Vanguard with Youthberk in its card name attacks, it gets plus 5k power until end of turn. So again, more easy scaling on top of the maple we just looked at. Then auto Rearguard Circle at the end of the battle, this unit attacked. If your Vanguard was placed by the Draggrass ability this turn, you cost retire this unit and draw a card. So unlike Brachio that has to hit, this card is going off regardless. Obviously, you are going to be swinging Vanguard first, very similar to how, the OG set 6, Tempest Youth was playing. But yeah, this card's just kind of better than Brachio. I think Brachio is still really nice in the early game and will do like a little bit more if you really, really want that. But, you know, not having the on-hit basically clause is really nice here. And again, this plus 5k, just like the Maple Clone we just looked at, isn't tied to your opponent's grid. So just very, very, very easy scaling similar to Exist that will just overwhelm your opponent. I think Forlorn Hope Dragon is just a really good card that you kind of have to play. I mean, it just retires itself, draw one, and no on-hit thing here. And just easy plus 5k power. You call this off Crimson Moon, you're like, all right, I'll just cycle draw one pretty much. So next card to talk about is Vanishing Claw Dragon. So auto when discarded from deck or hand other than during the battle phase. For example, if you use Youthberk's Act, if you have a grade 3 greater Vanguard with Youthberk in its card name, you cause Soul Blast 1 and call this card to Rearguard Circle. So if it's ditched off Youth skill, or if you ditch it for the act cost pretty much to check top 3, you just get a free body on board, which is really nice. And it's also a 10k shield, continuous Guardian Circle. If you have Vanguard with Youth, get shield plus 5. So 10k shield intervals are really nice because a lot of like really annoying pokes such as like 20 or 13 can be really annoying to guard. You don't really want to like double intercept maybe if you want to keep your attackers or give up a 15k shield. So yeah, honestly, just a really good card that you kind of have to play at some amounts because you don't really have any other good ditch fodder in this deck. I think Bellacrio is really good, but only works during ride phase. And the other card pretty much on discard just shoves itself to soul, so it's like kind of it's not really the greatest. You're not really plussing yourself, and you don't really do anything really to empty soul and draw. You have to soul blast Youth cards for the Maple we looked at. So yeah, I think this card is really good and has to be played at some amounts because you don't really have better pitch fodder in Dragon Empire right now. Alright, so we have Vandalism Dragon with a continuous and drop. When you would count the number of cards that you're dropped with Dragon in its race for your Vanguard's ability, this card is counted as 2, and it has continuous Rearguard Circle, Guardian Circle skill. If you have a grade 3 greater Vanguard with Youthberk, it gets plus 5k power, plus 5k shield. Surprised this isn't like a higher rarity card, but it also doesn't read the greatest as well. 5k, 5k, and then counts as 2 and drop. But yeah, honestly, you just don't have space with this card, and you have to be playing other cards for the early game, in my opinion, so I don't think you're really going to be playing Vandalism Dragon. Last card to talk about is Trusscythe Dragon with the auto when discarded from hand by the ability of your grade 3 greater Vanguard with Youthberk in its card name during your turn. You cost put this card into Soul and your Vanguard gets plus 5k power until end of turn. And then you just honestly don't have space for this card, and I think you just have to play the Claw Dragon instead. So we're just not going to spend more time talking about this pretty much. Alright, so let's talk about some of the deck building options you have for Youth. First off here, we have Wardon, which is a Wind Dragon, and I do want to note that for Nermans here, it is a Dragoid, so any kind of Dragoid such as Latifa won't count, obviously, towards the Dragon plus 1 power, but Wardon is a really great option because, of course, just like when we played Brodiarch in OG Youth before, you know, we had Rebuild, this card is just really easy for the early game to slam down and gets that plus 5k power, and of course, from Rearguard Circle or drop, when you discard from hand, you can E3 remove, add it back to your hand, so kind of an option if you do want to do that, but of course, if you're removing it from game, you aren't getting that build, you know, into drop to get that plus 1k power. For Nermians, it's pretty much just here just as an option if you want more cards to check top. I think between Crimson Moons, you'll have more than enough ways to basically get that off, but Nermians also gets that plus 5 for the cont, and, you know, finding your Persona Ride is pretty important in Youth, because you do have the check top 7 for the grade 2, but also being able to grab your Regulus pieces as well off Nerman is pretty nice, so kind of just wanted to mention it here. I saw a lot of people on Twitter talking about Acute Dragon, specifically in JP2, because this was like a really crazy rushdown build, specifically in Varga as well, and a lot of other Dragon Empire decks that it was used in. It is a Dino Dragon, works very well with Dino Fest and all the other generics we have as well, and it gets really big, so on attack or boost, use Soul Blast 1, and it gets plus 5k power until end of battle for each of your other grade 1 or less rearguards, so it's a massive booster for Youth, or it's just a massive attacker in the early game to just absolutely overwhelm your opponent, making some crazy numbers that are like really impossible to guard, so just wanted to mention that as well. For some other grade 1s, we have Stealth Dragon Amachichiri here, and this card is an Abyss Dragon, but basically it's just here for the draw 1 cycle, so kind of just an interesting card if you did want to play a build that pretty much just cycles through your deck very fast. I think Ryuto could also be very decent in this deck as well. Being able to have that guaranteed CB1, you know, sack itself off to search for Persona Ride is pretty much a guaranteed Persona Ride for your Youthberk, which is very important for the deck, I would say, especially because you're 4 attacks and not 5 attacks, but even in Exist, having Persona Ride is very important when you go first if you want to end the game on turn 4. And of course, the second skill, when an attack boosted hits, you retire this unit and countercharge 1, and if your opponent's grade 3, it's also just a 13k booster, so just a very solid card in general, but it is a Dragoid, so it won't be counting towards, you know, the Youth plus 1k. So once again, we have to talk about how broken Dino Fest and Bellacrio is. I kind of feel like a broken record at this point because I already talked about this for the Alphard video. But yeah, these cards are very good. Bellacrio is just good in the early game. It can also be a 10k booster that can intercept for the back row for Youth, which is just very good, hitting some very nice magic numbers. We also have Dino Fest as well, just to basically check top 5 for your pieces, for your attacker, for your Persona ride. So just a very, very easy card to also slot and throw into the deck as well. I haven't exactly cooked a list for these cards specifically, but they are Dino Dragons, so they will count towards the cost as well. The only thing with Dino Fest is that, because it's binding itself, it's not binding itself in drop to add towards that +1 count to maybe hit some very nice numbers with Youth. But for the most part, these cards are just very, very good generics that you'll probably see at some copies in some lists. Some more cards to shout out are the Dragon Mans, and I think Gojo is the most obvious one here. I think the deck space is a little tight if you want to max out on the really good grade 2s in this list for, Youthberk Phantom specifically, but Gojo is just a very strong card, very good in the early game, just more cycle into your deck for the, on place draw 1, then you have to discard 1. I think Yenjin is an okay option if you just want to burn CB and you get more soul instead of binding it if you really want to do that because it's a Dragon Man. Joy here is just something I saw online because some people really wanted to cook for playing a normal order because you're playing your Crimson Moon anyways to seal your opponent's intercept, which is pretty cool that you can do for your Vanguard swing. But I think you're retiring anyways, but it's kind of just an option, kind of like Rokusei. So it's a pretty cool tech for Joy where you can basically seal off their intercepts, then Dynast on attack, and they don't really have an opportunity to use up their intercepts. We have the more on-hit pressure gang. We have Draegforce right here and Gonjoku with the on-attack. When it hits a Vanguard, retire itself, draw 1. Pretty much just here to be annoying to your opponent. And Aeon Rush is kind of like a throwaway card because it does kill itself at end of turn, can get +10. But I think your energy usage is actually pretty tight because your ride line uses energy, so that will likely go to something else like Habitable Zone or the Ace unit, but still pretty solid cards. So pretty much to go off that, we have more Stealth Dragons that we saw in the anime. I don't think you're actually going to be playing these, but it was just really random that they decided to throw in like OG BT03 and BT02 cards that Raika is using, which I think is hilarious. And also the Shout to Soul is nice, but you don't really use too much soul in this deck besides, the grade 2 Soul Blasting Youth cards, but that doesn't really help you here. And of course, you could be playing like Soul in Fronts or any other options if you really, really wanted more soul. And of course, last but not least, we have Defensing Roar, which of course is just kind of your one-off in the deck as it's limited to 1. Just kind of a broken card when you have OT in it. It's just 2 PGs. I think Ace unit might not even be played, but it is just kind of a nice option for more removal because you'll basically, with Phantom skill on the top of the Ace unit, retire 3 cards off your opponent's board. And of course, being able to remove abilities in some matchups is very, very strong. I think Fall Heart is an option, but for the most part, you'll probably just see Habitable Zone instead because getting your Crimson Moons is pretty important. And of course, it also gets you more superior calling in the early game. And of course, the usual mention goes to the Latifah slot package, where you play the Crimson Moon Order, Latifah, and Shenri, but do note that none of these cards are Dragon, but as usual, it's kind of just more crazy high roll for the early game if you did want to play a very much aggressive version of Youthberk Phantom. Some other cards I want to mention that people maybe forgot existed. We have Meteor Flare to remove cons in some matchups, such as against Buddy Fight and whatnot. You can also CB1 retire as well, and also gets +10k if they have no rear, so pretty easy to do when you snipe off 1, and then you're sniping off another 2 off Dynast. Forward or Revertus is kind of funny. This was more so for Shenri, or, with, Shiranui back in the day, but it can retire for CB1, has to be grade 2 greater, or call grade 2 or less from your soul. And of course, Golgafane is just kind of the obligatory mention because it should be really cheap once we get the reprints and the Overlord, but it's pretty much just here for that ride phase cycle. And CB1 can wipe that column in Persona Ride, but you likely aren't going to be seeing Golgafane. Just kind of want to mention it here because there really isn't too many good retire that are generic for Dragon Empire. Pretty much Meteor Flare and Forward are kind of your best options. If Forward's more flexible for the early game, but I think for the most part, this deck will kind of just focus on really just rushing down your opponent because you have a lot of really easy pressure and power. Either you go first or second. Alright, so last thing I want to mention are the Regulus pieces, and I think Bracing Angel Ladder is the obvious one because you get even more power during your turn. All of your Vanguards get +5k power, and of course you also get that resist for your rearguard circles as well as them not being able to be moved pretty much, so very, very good against Prison, and that +5k power with that extra red text that you gain from, Youthberk Phantom to just get +1k power for every dragon can scale very, very easily and make things such as your Vanguard very, very hard to guard. I think the drop effects are very obvious just because you have that act to discard for Twin Cast and Fire Regulus, and these cards will activate and drop. They're also just very easy to pitch for Rideland, and Fire Regulus can also check top 5 because it doesn't specify a unit card. You can also call Crimson Moon and get that into drop if you really needed, let's say, the extra retire, or you had to reach that 3 for the extra 5k power to your front row off Youthberk Dynast. Some other Regulus pieces to quickly mention are Radiance Caliburn for that Shove to Soul countercharge 1. It's kind of the Vargas syndrome, but if you did want that main phase countercharge, it is an option. Shroud in Darkness is pretty nice just to get some free bodies on board, and You in the Sky can come out because I'm sure you're going to cycle through your Persona rides very, very fast for that extra 25k shield draw 1, and it is basically another ride phase cycler in the deck. Alright, so now for the list, I didn't want to make it too complicated. I pretty much just put in 4 of every good card here. Of course, we have the ride line as well as 3 Persona rides for Dynast, and then of course 4 of the Maple pretty much is what I'm going to call it for now, as well as the better Draegforce to just retire itself, draw 1. We pretty much have 4 Habitable Zones because you want to find your Crimson Moons, and you do want that for the retire every turn, and of course to hit that 3 Crimson Moons, so you can hit 2 into 1 or 1 into 2 bind for that extra power to your front row. I think you kind of just have to play the grade 1 for Ravenclaw because you don't really have anything else that's really Soul Blasting 1 to get things out onto your board, and really nothing else is using Soul besides the grade 2 that's Soul Blasting specifically Youth, so it's just really easy to get more boosters out onto your board. I think Defensing Roar is something you kind of have to play to prolong the game. It's also just more defense in this deck because really there's no extra shield on intercepts or really much defense in this deck at all. And Ace Unit is just kind of the 1-up slot I decided to throw in here because kind of putting anything else as an awkward 1-up feels really weird. And at worst, it's just early game slam down EB3 draw 1, 15k beater. You have any grade 1 behind that, nice 23 column. Fire Regulus is just kind of filler here in case you need more pieces if you are in like a retire matchup. But I think Twin Cast and Angel Ladder are also very good options as well. And of course, 4 Crimson Moons. And pretty much all the triggers here are dragons as well as the PG. Of course, we're playing 4 PG just because D-Roar, just so you don't have that conflict with Sanct. But of course, Sanct is also fine. But you know, Sanct will remove itself, so you don't get that extra +1 and drop. So we're kind of trying to optimize dragons is the idea with this list. So all the triggers here are actually dragons, including the PG as well. So pretty much the only things that aren't dragons in this deck, again, are Youthberk or your orders pretty much. But yeah, you're going to be scaling very easily in the early game. And I think Habitable Zone is honestly a great option for this deck. It just might be a little bit expensive. But yeah, if you pretty much remove Habitable Zone and the Ace Unit, and I guess technically Defensing Roar, this deck should be pretty cheap, you know, if you ignore Crimson Moons and how much those are right now in East Asia. But I do think the generics, as mentioned early, are just very, very easy to throw in this deck just to have a better early game. But this is kind of just a very simple version of the cards that just got revealed that kind of just really just plays the deck itself and is very self-contained again. So yeah, pretty much all I've done to make this list a little bit more defensive is swapped out Fire Regulus for Protection Twin Cast, as well as putting in Bellacrio because it is just a crazy grade 2. I'm probably saying his name wrong, by the way. But, you know, 10k booster, intercept from back row, and he's just so easy to pitch in during the ride phase and just get a free body on your board going first or second to just rush down your opponent, or just, you know, have more shield on your board, because really you don't have much shield or defense in this deck at all besides Defensing Roar, really. So I think having that flexibility of Twin Cast, D-Roar, and Bellacrio makes you a lot more tanky than you would think. And of course, we are again playing the same 2-2 split for the effect heals, because there are some things such as like Blavey Loss and whatnot in the meta right now that are gaining crit +1, you know, without trigger effects. So it's nice to have that little extra shield, and has Dragon in its race unlike the restand heal. Alright, so that pretty much wraps it up for Youthberk Phantom. Thank you guys so much for watching. Next Tuesday, we have Zorga Phantom support, as well as a new Dragon Empire generic. Like, wow, another one? Like, Dragon Empire, though, is clearly the favorite here, as well as the 15th anniversary live stream. And we're going to see Kai and Aichi's voice actors there as well. So hopefully they'll be opening up the start decks or doing some kind of promotion or marketing there, obviously. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I didn't want to cook up too many lists for Youthberk because I think there's so many, honestly, you can go with all the good Dragon Empire generics we have. But yeah, I pretty much just went for a very simple version of the deck, and I think Bellacrio is just a very, very good card, as well as Dino Fest to just throw into this deck, and then they also have Dino Dragon too, so very, very easy to just kind of have that synergy, and there's, again, a lot of very good Dragon Empire generics. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy, like, subscribe, the usual, and I'll see you again in another Vanguard video.